Horror games definitely went through the most experimental phase during the likes of the 5th and 6th console generations with the PS1 and PS2, even with the likes of the Xbox, Nintendo GameCube and the like. They will present some of the greatest experiences that we can still see to this day, and in some cases have never been bettered. But in saying that, there have also been a lot of other experimental titles like that of the PS1 that may not have hit the mark as such when we compare it to the more mainstream titles like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but they were interesting enough to draw people in if you were a fan of the genre itself, that will offer up something a little bit different and unique, that offered a different gameplay style or that had some different traits around it that you wouldn't get anywhere else. And one of the games in question we'd be looking at here would be Curse, the Eye of Isis, that released on the PlayStation 2, the Xbox and even on the Windows PC in the year 2003, that was set in the late 1800s, where you play as two different characters, both Darian and Victoria, being tasked with trying to find a cursed artefact that was stolen during an exhibition in a British museum. But upon it being stolen, it also unleashed a curse that turned everything around it, all people and entities, into grotesque, hideous abominations and cursed demons. So the goal of your characters is literally to take back the artefact and to pretty much bring it back to its initial resting place to break the curse. But along the way you will meet many monsters. Pretty much anyone that comes in contact or that is in the area of this artefact will be transformed into a monster. And the curse also has the ability to bring back undead entities that have been dead for a long time, such as mummies and even zombies. So you have to be mindful of your surroundings at all times. It has some interesting elements, but upon the game's release it got fairly average reviews, with many reviewers stating the game to be more of a budget entry survival horror game, as the controls, while playable, were a bit clunky and it just didn't have the refinement of your more mainstream survival horror games. If you compare it to the likes of Silent Hill and Resident Evil, which many people do, and that is often the case even still to this day, this game really didn't have a patch in that. But it definitely had some really cool concepts, like it was in the 1800s and Gothic settings based in Victorian England, so that was a really cool touch. It was dark, very gritty, and there is a lot of atmosphere in it, in fairness there is. And the game can be quite long. You'll find yourself having to explore similar areas quite a bit in order to find elements that you need in order to progress, from keys and solving puzzles. So you will find yourself having to do a lot of backtracking in order to complete the objectives required to move forward. But along the way you will also have to contend with dealing with many enemies and traps along the way. But you can utilise various different types of weapons for melee combat that you'll find, like with swords and even like batons. But you'll even gain access to the likes of pistols and even rifles that you can also use that will deal more damage to take out enemies from afar. But like I said, you always have to be mindful of your surroundings, because if enemies get too close to you, they will deal a lot of damage. yes, it's not the most refined survival horror game that's ever been made, especially during this era. It is definitely a more lesser version or lower quality version if you compare it to the higher end games. But there's some interesting elements here that you didn't see or wouldn't see at that time in any other game. And that's what makes these games really interesting to play and even unique in some cases, because they're just different from what else was out there. Yes, they were inspired by the classics, but they tried to do something a wee bit different. And it's still playable for what it is trying to do. Now, in saying that, when we look at it in the modern day era, the game has seen releases on the likes of like modern platforms with the likes of GOG.com and even likes of Steam and so forth. Even the Xbox 360 for a point actually had some backwards compatibility with the game, but due to glitches it made the game unplayable, so the game isn't the easiest game to get up and running on modern systems. The best way probably still to play it would be if you had the physical game on the console itself. Now, in saying that, emulation has improved an awful lot over recent times, so the game is playable to some degree, so that might be a good alternative, but probably the best way to play it would be doing your own physical copy of the game. Now, I remember even myself owning the PlayStation 2 version of this back in the day, and I remember playing it quite a bit. Now, I never fully finished the game. I actually always would get stuck in a certain area, and even though I could never really fully get out of the museum, because you always found yourself being stuck around certain areas and never really being able to be fully sure of where you could go or what you could do. And I suppose at the time, like a lot of games that I played over the years, even though you were enjoying the experience, but there was just certain things that just didn't click for you in that moment, and you found the game to be not so much repetitive, but you kind of were lost as to what you were supposed to do. Things just didn't make sense to you at that time. Now, in saying that, going back to play the game now and years later, things just click for you, and sometimes that's what happens, I find, with a lot of games that I've played, is that things aren't as apparent and they just don't make sense the first time you play it. But sometimes with a bit of time and even taking a step back and going back to it sometime later, things just suddenly make sense and you kind of know what to do, and you'll find that you'll enjoy the experience a lot more. And I found that here as I sat down to play the game again for recording footage for the video. I found myself actually getting a lot further in it than I did back in the day, which is kind of mad when you think about it. But it is what it is. It's one of those games that's intriguing enough, and I definitely still have yet to finish it, which I will intend to do hopefully over the next while, because it was one of those games that I was really curious enough to want to finish back in the day, and I still want to now, so I am definitely going to give it a good go when I get a chance. There is just enough interesting quips about it to make you want to finish it, and the fact is it is dark and atmospheric, and it does have some distinctive elements and unique traits about it that you really won't see anywhere else. Right, it's not the best survival horror game on the PlayStation 2, far from it, but like I said, if you're a fan of survival horror, this is worth a go anyway. There's many interesting quirks and traits around games that were being developed around this time, so that makes it even more appealing really at the end of the day, and it did for me. So regardless of what I think of the game, I would love to know your thoughts of Curse the Eye of Isis, and what did you think of it overall? Were you a fan of this game, or did you even know it existed? Or are you a fan of this era of survival horror in general, where they were experimenting with various different ideas and so forth? So be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other games that I have covered previously on the channel that look at more survival horror games in general, then leave a like on the video, and you can check out this playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And I will see you in the next one.